Good afternoon. If you all want to start taking your seat and we can get ready here. I would like to welcome you to our One Tam 5th Annual Summit, where we'll be talking about a sneak peek at peak health. My name is Yolanda Mollett, and I'm the Director of Conservation and Community Science. I'm with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. My department includes One Tam Community Science that's led by Lisette Ariano, One Tam Conservation Management that's led by Rachel Kiesel, and as well as Parks Conservancy Golden Gate Raptor Observatory that's led by Alan Fish. Okay, I would like to invite Claire Mooney up to read our land acknowledgement, and she is the Parks Conservancy Vice President of Parks, Places, and Innovation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we begin, we do want to acknowledge that we are on Coast Miwok land. Mount Tamalpais and the lands that encompass the One Tam area of focus are Coast Miwok. Today, the Coast Miwok are represented by the Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria, which includes Southern Pomo. The peak health effort exemplifies the work of the One Tam partners, the National Park Service, California State Parks, Marin Water, Marin County Parks, and the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. And it represents our current collective knowledge. It stems from a Western academic tradition and perspective and the regulatory frameworks in which we all operate. We recognize that the Coast Miwok people have millennia of knowledge as well as contemporary scholarship about this region. Working absent their perspective limits our understanding of the land and what health means.
Thank you, Claire. We are so glad to finally be back in person again as a broader One Tam community. And since this is my first time as a moderator for their summit, I'm really excited to be here. Raise your hand if this is your first One Tam event. Nice. Well, welcome. I'm glad to see you here. One Tam isn't an organization. We're a partnership that was formed in 2014 and includes 4 different agencies. That's Marin County Parks, Marin Water, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and as well as California State Parks. And it also includes a nonprofit, and that's us, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. A lot of names to say here. We work collaboratively to support and steward the public lands that comprise and surround Mount Tamalpais in Marin County. I want to acknowledge all my colleagues from each of our 5 partners that have made this unique collaboration possible. And over the years, I've had to step into this leadership, and that's only been like 2.5 years. And I appreciate the collaborative approach of those who have come before me. The summit is just part of our shared work, and this is the 5th in the series that that was started back in 2016. We create these biannual events just to share our work and learn more from regional experts, as well as inspire our staff, but more importantly is to connect with you, the community. And this year, we're coming full circle from our first gathering that was back in 2016 to revisit that question and ask, is Mount Tamalpais at peak health? This is supposed to be slide 3. So Mount Tamalpais, if we could just stay here, is the iconic centerpiece of the landscape here in southern Marin. We know that part of its history and its story is only a recent chapter. And we know that its health is intertwined with our own. And as a One Tam partnership, we knew that we could do more for the mountain and the communities and that enjoy and depend on it than we could just alone. So in 2016, we embarked upon an unprecedented effort to help us develop an understanding of the status and the different trends of the various natural resources from a holistic perspective. Thank you. Rather than focusing on smaller agency jurisdictions and individual areas of expertise, we put the pieces of the puzzle together. And that created a bigger picture and as well as a greater ability to make science-based decisions. Slide 4. Okay. So about 60 scientists and practitioners from the One Tam partners and many communities partners came together. And through sharing decades of data of combined expertise, they completed the first ever health assessment of an entire mountain. They came up with ways to define and measure health for over 30 indicators in species of ecosystems. So what did that first process tell us? Well, it told us that overall the mountain was holding at a fair condition. The first process helped us identify gaps in our knowledge and the holistic actions we could take. It indicated that we're here to work together, and together is just One Tam. So what is this summit going to cover? Well, this year the One Tam partners came together to update those initial findings for the first time after 5 to 6 years. And this year's the summit, called Sneak Peek at Peak Health, will present those results. We'll include knowledge gaps that we've been working on to fill and need to learn more about new indicators such as bats and bees, and the actions we've taken, new information needs that we've identified, new sources of information that we didn't have the last time, like our countywide vegetation map, and as well as information from crowdsourced data on iNaturalist. It also includes climate change assessment that was provided by our community partner, Pepperwood Preserve. And we'll hear some of those reflections in some of the talks today. So today is just part 1. You can just go back to the other slide. Today is just part 1, and it's just a taste. It's just the appetizer of the whole menu of opportunities to engage with peak health. And part 2 will be field trips and virtual experiences. And part 3, later in the winter, we'll have a deeper dive in which we'll try and bring all those pieces together. So at this time, I would like to introduce Max Corton to help kick off this event. He is the general manager for the Marin County Parks and Open Space District since 2016 and is a member of our One Tam executive team. And prior to that, Max worked with several local and federal parks and natural resources program, including the Conservation Corps North Bay, Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. Forest Service. Please welcome Max.
Thank you, Yolanda. Let's see, move this up. Thanks, everybody. It is so cool to be here and see everybody in the real world. So being part of One Tam is one of the coolest parts of my job. Is that okay? Thank you. It's a time where we get to work together on our most important part of our work, focusing on equity, welcoming people from all walks of life to our parks and preserves, on youth programs, on stewardship, taking care of this really special place, on legacy projects to help adapt to climate change, and on landscape level science, and that's what we're going to hear about today. And part of that is sort of a report card to figure out how are we doing in taking care of these natural spaces. But the other part of community science that Yolanda mentioned is inspiring us. It's what makes us want to do the work we do, and for those of us who work here, for the folks in the community, it's what makes us take care of these places, is really learning about them and learning about the animals and plants that thrive here. And I just wanted to share a really brief story. My first job as a ranger, I was 19. I grew up in LA in Inglewood, and I never thought I'd be doing this work. And somebody came to my class at UC Santa Cruz in my freshman year, and they were like, you should volunteer for the Student Conservation Association. So I signed up, And somebody called me from the Eastern Sierra, and they were like, you can work in Mammoth Lakes. And I was like, I'm sold. Sounds cool. So I went there, and there's a whole bunch of different things I had to do as a part of that seasonal job. But one of them was leading wildflower hikes and the ranger talks in the campground at night. And I did not know anything about plants or animals or any of it at that point. And so it was really cool. I got to spend the first month I was there just hiking with our wildlife biologists, with the vegetation ecologist, with the rangers, and just learning about everything. And I can remember this moment where the conifers, which in my mind before that were just all pine trees, all of a sudden were like fir trees and lodgepole pines, and just all white bark pines. All of a sudden I was like, wow, there's so much here that I just didn't know about before. And I was really fortunate on one of my wildflower hikes where I was getting like half of the things right. There was an ecology professor from UC Davis, and he enjoyed kind of teasing me about how terrible I was. And he ended up hiring me, and again, it was that experience the next summer I got to work for him and learn more. But that summer I went to the library there in Mammoth Lakes, and I changed all my classes to environmental studies, to biology and entomology, and gosh, it's all I've done ever since. I absolutely love it, and just wanted to share it because I think that's part of what I'm excited about today, is hearing from people like the folks we're going to hear from today is what inspires me, and I'm guessing it's something that inspires all of you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Yolanda, and just can't wait to talk to all of you later.
Thank you, Max. What a great story to share. So as a plant ecologist myself, vegetation is vital to me. And we're going to hear from our first speaker, Rosa Schneider. She was a foundational staff member of One Tam and is now a senior environmental scientist at California State Parks. She will tell us about the importance of Marin County vegetation map and landscape database. This is an invaluable new tool that we now have to understand the present extent and condition of our vegetation. Then we'll have Danny Franco. He'll be talking more about the Marin County vegetation map and landscape database, and he is someone who has been developing the strategy behind that work. And then last but never least, we'll have Rachel Kiesel, and she will be talking about serpentine barren endemics. I would like to welcome Rosa to the stage.
Thank you, Yolanda. It's great to be here in person with everybody. And Max, I'm not sure if we're the same vintage, but I was UCSC Environmental Studies and definitely cut my teeth on fieldwork in the Eastern Sierra. So this here is the cover of the 2016 Peak Health Report. I know everyone read all 358 pages before coming. Thank you. So this kind of set the baseline of our knowledge about the mountain's plant communities and key animal species. And it also, most importantly, from my point of view, identified some of the data gaps, so where we need to be focusing our time and resources to better protect these natural resources. And for vegetation communities, it was pretty clear that the main data gap was the need for a mountain-wide spatial vegetation data, or veg map. So as of 2016, in Marin County, the available vegetation mapping data was not comprehensive. It was pretty much limited to these polygons here, which represent the Marin Water and Marin County Parks land bases. Some other detailed mapping had been done in the late 1990s, but it was definitely time for an upgrade, time to fill in some of these gaps. And then just to pull out one of these vegetation communities, the Coast Redwood Forests, here's the data that was available as of 2016. There's Mount Tam State Park. So anyone who's been hiking on Tam knows that there's redwoods there. So just an example of the data gap that we were facing. So even though the data gap identified was for mountain-wide information, this being One Tam and the Parks Conservancy and being amazing, they didn't just do mountain-wide, they did the whole county. So look where we are now. This was finished in 2021. And I'm not going to go into the details of the methods. You can ask my ghostwriter, Danny Franco, during the happy hour. But let's just say it involved a lot of botanical field work, collecting aerial imagery, LiDAR, machine learning, and very close coordination with California Native Plant Society to make sure that our local vegetation patterns and species compositions were being correctly classified. So the map on the right, each polygon is, for the most part, a different vegetation community at the alliance level. There's 110 different ones of those in the veg map, and there's 96,000 tiny little polygons on there. From the state parks point of view, we are super excited. State parks, we can do a lot. We're pretty good at CEQA, trail building, catching peacocks, but we absolutely cannot make a countywide map. That's just not what we're going to be able to do. We would do it park by park. So this is super exciting. Not only do we get the Mount Tam data, but we get the data for Olompali State Historic Park, China Camp, Angel Island, Samuel P. Taylor, Tamalpais. Anyone know the other state park in Marin besides Naphtali? Anybody? Okay, it's Marconi State Historic Park. Pretty much non-native Monterey pines, but it's still a state park. All right, so let's look back at the redwood data. Another one of my things that I'm working on is updating the peak health chapter for the Coast Redwood Forests. So now that we have the new veg map, we can fill in all of those redwood polygons at Mount Tam State Park. There's even some at China Camp, plenty at Samuel P. Taylor, and the whole rest of the county, including private lands. So this is really amazing. And I think with that, I'll pass it off to Danny to talk about the Marin Forest Health Strategy.
Thank you, Rosa, and Yolanda, and Max, and everyone. Yes, I am Danny Franco, Project Manager with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. I have 7 minutes to tell you everything I know about the Marin Regional Forest Health Strategy. Should be no problem. Like Rosa, we are going to start with the 2016 Peak Health Report, which identified the data gap of the fine-scale vegetation map. It also, as Yolanda indicated in her introduction, indicated that the health of the mountain overall was kind of middling at that fair scale. And when we dig into that a little bit, what we find in the data is that forest condition trends necessitate management in key areas. But where? And so using the fine-scale vegetation map as our baseline of analysis, we can identify the forests in Marin County. Super helpful for doing a forest health strategy, it turns out. How do we approach this idea that these forests need our attention, that the condition trend can be improved, but it may require some active management in key areas? How do we approach that? Well, at One Tam, we approach things in partnership. You may be picking that up by now. And we developed the Marin Regional Forest Health Strategy with these 5 partners, sort of developing a working group of natural resource professionals at each of the key agencies to do a deep dive on forests and forest health and forest resiliency. Resilience is where we started this forest health strategy. That's identifying what resilience means for Marin forests particularly. We're talking about climate resilience. We're talking about resilience to threats and stressors that are identified both in the 2016 and updated 2022 Peak Health Report. And each one of these bullets that's going to come down is a chapter in the Forest Health Strategy. The next one I'm really happy to point out is the Indigenous Stewardship, and thank you, Claire, for the land acknowledgement. This is Coast Miwok land. We wanted to integrate at least some Coast Miwok perspective into the Forest Health Strategy. We worked with Federated Indians of Grattan Rancheria to identify a professor at UC Berkeley, Dr. Peter Nelson, who's not only a professor in the anthropology department, but is also a Coast Miwok citizen. And through Peter's leadership, we were able to develop a chapter that is dedicated to daylighting some of the information that Coast Miwok people have held for millennia about the forests of Marin and generally about Indigenous stewardship overall. There's also some recommendations in there for future partnership, which we're really, really grateful to have. Can't talk about resilience without talking about climate change. That's also a chapter in the Forest Health Strategy. It's kind of lumped together with the other stressors. So when we talk about climate change and the complex interactions between things like sudden oak death and drought or extended periods of drought or past land use like old logging roads, that's all identified in this stressors and climate change chapter. Much of this is a literature review. It's not available online yet, but you'll be hearing from us when it is. As soon as I'm done writing it, I'm going to leave. As soon as my talk is over, I have to get back to the computer. We're going to lay out some goals for the key forest types that we profile in the Forest Health Strategy, and those are Coast Redwoods, Sargent Cypress Forest, Douglas Fir Forest, Open Canopy Oak Woodlands, and Bishop Pine Forest. Then we dive into the data. For those of you that like data-driven and science-driven analysis and decision-making, we have a whole chapter on the metrics that we use to kind of dig into not just the fine-scale vegetation maps or the spatial distribution of forest types, but the conditions of forests. Where do we have concentrated areas of sudden oak death impact? Where do we have areas where we're seeing drought impacts? Where are we seeing a departure from the desired condition in coast redwood forests? The metrics that we use to identify those areas are written in that chapter. We use those metrics to do a countywide forest health conditions assessment. That's a summary of what we found. And then we transition to talking about some priority areas. So we kind of fly you around the county in that chapter, looking at sort of this intersection of where you have a departure from desired conditions or where you have forests that are actually in quite good conditions that are hanging on, but that have pressures that we would like to address through active management. Those are some of the priorities that are outlined in that chapter. And then we finally wrap up with a high-level overview of treatment approaches. So what are the kinds of approaches to stewardship-focused active management approaches that we can take to address some of these degraded conditions or protect some places where we have really valuable forests. And then lastly, we want to learn from our experience. We want to learn from the inputs and outputs and things that we're seeing as we are out on the landscape. And so we have a whole chapter that talks about monitoring. So this is our forest health strategy that I'm going to go continue to write as soon as I leave this podium. Thank you. Once again, come talk to me. I'll be hanging out after the event. Rachel Kiesel, Grasslands. Rachel Kiesel, Serpentine Endemics.
There we go. All right, folks. So to sort of drill down into some of these vegetation types that Rosa and Danny have been talking about, I'm going to talk about the smallest one, the serpentine barren endemics. They're actually so small that they're not even measured by the vegetation map in most cases. So we're going to go tiny and tough now. So why are we talking about these plants, these serpentine endemic annual plant species? Well, we have a rare habitat type on Mount Tam that gives us a lot of endemic plant species, some of which only grow on Mount Tam or in Marin or in the Bay Area regionally. There are some known threats to these species, some of which I'll tell you how we're working on. And these are just amazing plants. Honestly, I'm talking to you about this because I like them. So how are they doing? In 2016, we gave this group of rare plants a fair with a declining trend. That was our assessment, but we knew we had some data gaps, which you've heard about before. And this round, we're going to call them fair and stable. So I'm going to take you through the 3 metrics that we're using to assess the serpentine barren endemics, starting with our common rare plants. So we're going to talk about this bristly, Mount Tam bristly jewel flower on the left here and the Tiburon buckwheat. And we're calling those common rare plants because they have a wider distribution across Mount Tam than some of the other species I'm going to talk about. They are still rare around the state or just endemic and rare themselves, but on Mount Tam, they're actually fairly well distributed. So we're going to give those guys fair and stable in terms of their condition and trend. We have some mixed situations going on where we have some small declines in the Mount Tam bristly jewel flower in the past couple of years.
But we don't have enough of a long-term data set to say that there's an actual decline going on there. Annual plants are very tied to timing and the amount of rain, so we're going to need much more time to see if this trend continues or whether or not it's even a trend. In fact, the Tiburon buckwheat had a little bit of a dip in the middle of our about 5 or 6 years of monitoring these species, but those numbers have come back up. So fair and stable. Our rare plants, we're calling the Marin Navaricia and the Tamalpais jewel flower. And again, we have sort of a mixed situation here with that Marin Navaricia. Part of what makes it more of a rare plant is that it has not only does it need serpentine barrens, but it needs a little bit of soil accretion. So it doesn't really grow out in the gravelly, rocky bits of the barrens. So it has even a smaller niche that it can survive in, and those are distributed mostly, I would say, on the north side of the mountain, but mostly the limiting factor is that you need that little bit of deposition, and usually it's going to be a little bit low and flat. Those are doing pretty well, a little bit of a dip on one of our reference barrens this year, but again, not enough to give a declining trend. And the Tam jewel flower is much like its cousin, the Mount Tam bristly jewel flower, with a little bit of dips in the past couple of years. You know that we're in an extended drought, and I can't say that that's the cause, but both of those species have a little bit of a dip in the past 2 years in some of the places where we look, though not all. And the Mount Tam jewel flower, the Tamalpais jewel flower, it's distributed mostly on the north side of the mountain in far fewer barrens than we find the bristly jewel flower, which is why we would call it a rare plant. And then we have 2 species that are covered by the Serpentine Soils Recovery Plan for the San Francisco Bay Area. That's a 1998 federal plan looking at many serpentine species in the Bay Area, as the name would suggest. The Marin dwarf flax exists beyond the One Tam area of focus, but our assessment here is really tied to the populations on Mount Tam. The Tamalpais lysyngia is also covered by that plan, and the way that the plan looks at them is a number of populations with a number of individuals each year in a given area. So that's where we're coming with the fair and stable for those, though it is very much a mixed story for these two, with the Marin dwarf flax in the Mount Tam area not meeting the number of populations or individuals per population. However, the Tamalpais jewel flower, the Tamalpais lysyngia, you probably can't see on the tally counter, but there's 9,810 that we've tallied up in this spot. We stop at 10,000, that's our cutoff. And for that species, they're looking for 2,000 individuals in 4 populations in its historic range on Mount Tam. That plant is doing very well, whereas the Marin dwarf flax doesn't have quite the distribution of populations or the number of individuals. But it kind of falls out into this fair and stable again. So that's where we're landing on the serpentine barrens. And how do we know this? The 2016 report gave us an opportunity to think about what kind of monitoring we needed to do. So my group, David Greenberger and our cohorts of seasonals and other staff go out each year, and after inventorying the majority of barrens that we can reach on Mount Tam, which is approximately around 100-ish, we now return to 3 what we call reference barrens. It took us a few years to get all of those established, but we go back to the same ones every year, which over time will allow us to speak more clearly to some of those trends. In terms of climate change, what we know actually still comes from the 2016 report, essentially that there aren't a lot of places that these species could migrate. They need the open rocky soil that is serpentine soil. The sort of darker green is the band of serpentine on Tam, but a fair bit of that is shrub or grassland or even Sargent cypress forest. So there's not a lot of places for them to go, which is probably the biggest concern with climate change. And I mentioned some of these threats. This is cheatgrass growing in a serpentine barren up at West Peak. That species, as well as a couple of other annual grasses, can also eke out a living on this tough soil type, this really dry area. And we manage it both with hand removal, and you can see David here flaming. So we do what we can to mitigate that so that the stress of any competition from these invasive plants or other impacts that they may have are mitigated for the persistence of the rare plants. And with that, thank you. And I think Yolanda's coming back up. Is that right?
So thank you, Rachel, Danny, and Rosa. I wanted to let you know that you can save your questions for the end, and thank you for doing that. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them on the back of your program, because we'll be meeting you at 4:30 in the beer garden for pizza and beer, and you can ask all those questions that you may have. You can look for the Ask Me About and ask the speakers or whoever you see that you want to ask a question about. So we're now going to move up a level or two in the food web. We're going to spotlight several wildlife species that were included in the peak health indicators of health. First, we'll have Sarah Leon Guerrero. She will be addressing bees. In her work, Sarah addresses ecological data gaps, implements long-term monitoring, provides science education, and promotes curiosity and participation in meeting audiences. And she'll provide that status on bees, as I mentioned. And then next, we'll have Eric Ettlinger. And he has been he's an aquatic ecologist at Marin Water since 1999, where he monitors aquatic species and enhances habitats. He'll be talking about an update on anadromous fish. And then we'll have Darren Fong. He's an aquatic ecologist at Golden Gate National Recreation Area since 1994. He works with various creeping, crawling, and swimming organisms and the habitats that support them in the park. And he'll provide an update on western pond turtle. So I would like to welcome Sarah first.
Hi, everyone. As Yolanda mentioned, I'm Sarah Leon Guerrero, and I'm one of the community science program managers at One Tam. And I'm going to talk to you about bees, although it also seems like Eric maybe should do this, because in case y'all didn't hear, bees are now fish. So, different area. Got to get creative in conservation. So why bees? Can I have my next slide, please? Well, because bees really co-evolved with flowers, and as we just heard about all of the vital vegetation, bees can tell us a lot about the pollination relationships and the plant communities and how they're doing overall. And insects were actually highlighted in the 2016 report as an ecological knowledge gap that we need to learn more about. And insects are some of the most diverse groups out there. It's hard to know about all of them, so sometimes we have to pick just one larger group to tell us more about these things. So that's why bees, because bees are the workhorses of the pollination world in the temperate regions. Next slide, please. Also, there's been a lot of doom and gloom and sensationalism in the world lately. In 2006, I want to say, colony collapse disorder became really well known. And you hear things like the insect apocalypse is here. But the reality is we really don't know that much about it, of how dire is it. Some things are going to do really well, some things are not doing so well, but we don't know unless we study them. Next slide, please. And also just because bees are pretty cool. I mean, they're pretty. They're so much more than the honeybees, the bumblebees. They come in all different shapes, colors, sizes. I should mention these photos are not to scale. So, if you look at the one that's kind of in the mid-center row, that's slightly below the really beautiful Osmia colbatina, so named because of that bright blue color, that's about the size of a grain of rice. So, they're hard to study, they're small, and we have 1,600 species in California alone, which is 40% of the total diversity in the US and Canada. So, phenomenal biodiversity here. Next slide, please. So how are bees doing? Because we didn't know much about them and they weren't really studied in the 2016 report, we really needed a baseline inventory to just know what is there to get that current condition. And so we kind of, based off some work that was done, these slides are a little out of order, that was done in 2017, 2018, that baseline inventory, we think that bees are doing pretty okay in our region, actually. We don't have enough at all to talk about trends or how they're doing, but the current condition we're thinking is actually doing okay. So next slide, please. And how do we know this? Well, after the 2016 report came out, the collaborative decided to enter into partnership with Dr. Gretchen Laboon at San Francisco State University, who is one of the world's experts on wild bee population. She's actually one of the co-authors on international protocols to standardize pollinator monitoring, kind of that global and national level. So we implemented a methodology that she and other bee researchers have proposed could be used to detect trends, to really do a baseline inventory within the Marin Water, State Parks, and Marin County Parks land, as well as to go through the historical record to see what was there in the past, and should we get a comprehensive species list. And they also looked at kind of the rare plants, as so defined in their methodology as plants of interest in the region. They may be endemic, they may be because they have restricted pollination relationships, and seeing if any of those relationships between the bees and the plants were so restrictive that if one were to decline, would it cause the decline in the other. And then just in the last 2 years, we're actually finishing up our inventory, our baseline, within the National Park Service lands within Point Reyes and the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. Next slide, please. So how do we know this? How do we know that bees are doing okay? Well, after going through the historical record, we found that there were historically 242 species of bees within Marin County. And from that survey, we recorded 79 of those historical species, and we actually added about 30 new species to that list that had never been recorded before, which, according to some of the experts, namely Terry Griswold, who's one of the expert taxonomists at the USDA Pollinating Insect Research Unit at Utah State, is actually a really phenomenal recapture rate for not going back with targeted resampling at those locations and only having about 26 transects. He's like, that's pretty unheard of. So that's one of the indicators that we got that, like, actually maybe bees are doing okay. And in fact, about 30% of those are specialist bees that have restricted foraging behaviors on specific plants. And so that's actually a pretty good recapture rate just for specialists that may have more restricted ranges as well. Next slide. So how are bees doing in climate change? And unfortunately, as I mentioned, we don't have enough data to really say within Mount Tam how are bees responding to climate change. But a lot of really amazing research has been done both with modeling and historical data sets and current data sets that, like, how are bee assemblages and bee populations responding to climate change? And the general consensus is there are winners and losers. They all have very different life histories. You know, we have big social bees like our bumblebees. We have small social bees like our halictids and our sweat bees, or we have small solitary bees that nest in the ground, or bees that nest within, pre-existing cavities. Just very, very diverse, and they respond differently to changing patterns. So, in general, there's a consensus that the bigger bodied bees that kind of like colder weather, namely our bumblebees, are doing poorly in climate change. Things are getting hotter, their ranges are becoming more restricted, although some of our bumblebees are doing well. The most common one, the yellow-faced, you're gonna see it everywhere. Its populations are actually getting better. And then the smaller bodied bees, and particularly the ones that are social and have multiple generations per year, they're also doing well during climate change. So it's not kind of like bees are gonna do well or they're gonna do poorly. We actually need to look at them a little differently, and it might be more according to functional traits and where they sit in the relationships with their plants. I think my final slide, but in general, I think we've all heard talk about this with things like Bombus occidentalis, caliginosis, some of these more charismatic microfauna, I would call them. Bumblebee species on the whole are declining around the world, and our range, wonderful Mount Tam with our beautiful, foggy areas, we probably are at risk of our bumblebee species declining as well. So that's an area of concern that we might want to look at in the future. And I think that's it for it. Yeah, and please find me later. I love to talk about bees, so come nerd out with me.
All right, hello. I'm going to be talking about anadromous fish, which, for those who don't know, anadromous fish are fish that are born in fresh water. They spend part of their life in salt water, and then they return to fresh water to reproduce. And around Mount Tam, anadromous fish include 4 species of salmon, steelhead trout, and Pacific lamprey. And I'm really going to focus on the populations of coho salmon and steelhead on the north side, Lagunitas Creek, and on the south side, Redwood Creek. So we study anadromous fish because, for one, they link the ocean and freshwater environments. They bring enormous amounts of nutrients from the ocean into freshwater systems. They have specific habitat requirements in the ocean and in freshwater, and they can tell us a lot about the quality of habitat in the ocean, in our streams, and actually on the land that drains into their streams. Healthy watersheds produce clean water that fish need. Just their simple presence tells you that the watershed is in good health. These fish have important roles in the food web, in the ecosystem, but in an urban environment, I think their most important role is that of an environmental ambassador or educator. We have these charismatic fish that return to our local streams every year and inspire people and connect people with nature, which has the potential to teach people about water quality issues, water quantity, food webs, and the interconnectedness of all living things. And while all of that is true, I think a lot of us who do this work just like to snorkel. So how are these fish doing? They're not doing well. So coho salmon are really hanging on in Marin County. In the Lagunitas Creek watershed, they are stable, but at very low numbers compared to historic numbers. On the south side of Mount Tam and Redwood Creek, they are being kept afloat with some real heroic measures, including raising fish in captivity. Steelhead are doing better, but are still at a much lower abundance than they were historically. So these species are some of the best studied organisms that we have in the Mount Tam area. And when my son was little, he used to say that his daddy counted fish, which is essentially right. We count these fish at every stage of their freshwater life cycle. So the adults are going to be coming back any day now, so we're going to be starting our adult surveys. We count the juveniles in the summer, and then when the smolts are heading out to the ocean, we count them again on their way out. So coho salmon, I'm going to focus on for a second here, are found throughout the North Pacific, but the southernmost wild population of coho salmon is found right here in Lagunitas Creek. And as climate change warms the ocean and warms our local streams, these populations are facing an existential threat. I mean, populations at the southern end of their range are in trouble as those ranges shift north. South of Mount Tam, I mean, there are still coho south of the Golden Gate in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Those populations are being augmented with hatchery fish. Lagunitas Creek, for the moment, it has a population that is completely wild and not being augmented. And I will leave you with a little bit of irony. So dams are the main reason that salmon have declined throughout California. And the cold water releases that we have in Lagunitas Creek out of Kent Lake may be one of the things that allow them to persist in the face of climate change. That's what I got. I'll leave you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and as well as Eric. And we're going to have Darren now.
Good afternoon. This is a warm room, so hopefully people can stay awake. Just want to present a little bit of information about our northwestern pond turtle. This is based on work that we've done in our park, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, as well as stuff from MMWD and Eric Etlinger. So one of the questions we were tasked with asking and providing an answer to is, why are we studying turtles? Well, for one, turtles are good indicators of aquatic and adjacent upland habitat. All life stages of the turtle require water, both hatchling turtles all the way up to adults. And it's also really important to have connected upland habitat. They do not breed in water, or excuse me, they do not lay their eggs in water. And the females actually need to climb out of the water and look for suitable nesting sites, presumably something that's really sunny. And if you have big roads that block movement, that actually causes some problems with mortality on roads, which is known to happen. So we really need to have connected and good quality sunny habitats along with water. The other thing is turtles themselves are really easy to monitor, unlike coyotes that might be a little bit more wily. And turtles are also very slow, so they're usually easy to spot. And I think this might be one of the many reasons why MNWD has had a very successful volunteer monitoring program since 2003. The other thing is the turtles themselves are really charismatic. I would argue with anyone that they're probably more charismatic than bunnies or coyotes. I have on my phone some hatchling turtles that are about the size of a quarter that I can share or airdrop with anyone. We can start that conversation. The other thing that makes turtles really good as indicators is that they're generally widespread, and historically within the One Tam area, they're probably found in all the low gradient streams, such as Lagunitas Creek, and all the perennial freshwater ponds and lagoons, again in the One Tam area. And so just want to go over some of the historic localities that we have had turtles in. They were and are found in Lower Lagunitas Creek. Their classic habitat is right around White House Pool. You can tell they like wide open spaces. And they love basking logs that are just extending out into the water in areas like this. They're also historically found in River Creek down at Muir Beach. You can see some squiggly lines off to the left. Those are topo lines and features are drawn from an 1852 Coast Geodetic Survey map. And you can see that there is an area that is a big open water freshwater marsh, which historically supported probably large numbers of pond turtles. And we know this also for a fact from looking at the archaeological records. There are turtle fragments that are in some of the middens that were found in this area. Unfortunately, in recent years, probably from a variety of reasons, we had our last turtle seen by, I think, Marin Pinto over at Golden Gate Dairy in like the late 1990s. And after that big flood event in 1998, I don't think we've seen turtles until our recent Head Start project in 2017. The other kind of historic locality, which caught me by surprise, but there were probably turtles over at Willow Camp or Poison Pond in Stinson Beach. There's this photo in black and white from just the turn of the century, around the 1900s, that show this beautiful freshwater pond. And we've had some interviews with residents that were around that era that noted that there are not only frogs, but also nondescript turtles in this area. And so that was probably likely western pond turtles that were here. Unfortunately, that pond is no longer. It's serving a function as either our picnic area or parking lot in the southern area. So it's been repurposed. So how are turtles doing overall? We did evaluate this in 2016 and again in 2022. Kind of that yellow-orange color means kind of the condition is a cautionary one. We do have an upward arrow that indicates that our population is improving, at least in one location. And so I'm just going to go over two of the metrics that we're using to come up with this condition assessment. The first metric is just habitat occupancy. What percentage or what numbers of our current sites are occupied versus what they were historically. And again, we had Lagunitas Creek, Stinson Beach, and Muir Woods in the, not Muir Woods, Muir Beach in our One Tam area. And as of 2016, prior to our Head Start project, we just had pond turtles in the Lagunitas Creek watershed, and specifically with the 4 MMWD reservoirs. In 2022, those reservoirs still have western pond turtles, but the new nuance is that starting in 2017 and ending in 2021, so a 5-year period, we had a joint partnership with Sonoma State University as well as the San Francisco Zoo to Head Start turtles. And so we released over this 5-year period about 42 turtles into the Muir Beach area. And this is just a picture of a juvenile turtle with a transmitter. That's this doohickey on top of the shell. And then we have, you can probably see some white painted numbers. Those are turtles that we've released into River Creek. The other metric that we've used is the number of turtles or abundance, and they're generally doing okay. MMW need numbers are bouncing around between like 10 and 30 per year. And the one thing that has maybe a little bit cause for alarm is that since 2014, the number of non-native turtles in the MMWD reservoirs have been pretty high. So that's something to think about in the future. So the question that we've been tasked to answer for almost all of our indicators is climate change affecting our species? And this is something that's really hard for us to evaluate for turtles since our monitoring data set is pretty short, but we can probably say that with an increased frequency of extreme events like floods and droughts, we could probably see some loss of turtles. There is a plus side. Turtles really actually need warm temperatures to successfully hatch eggs. And so if the predictions are true that we have a reduction in summer fog and warmer temperatures, we could have increased hatching success in our coastal areas. And also, this could increase the number of females that we would have as well. So I just want to thank Sonoma State, San Francisco Zoo, and our MNWD volunteer turtle observers. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Again, please remember to hold your questions, and you can see him out in the beer garden. We are going to take a 15-minute break. Feel free to use the patio up to the left here if you want to stretch, or you can get up and stretch here. And we'll see you back here at 3:15.
Thank you for regathering, and we're going to get started again. My name is Mia Monroe. I'm with the National Park Service. I'm the Marin Community Liaison, and I'm also on the One Tam Steering Committee. We're about to start the second part of our program now, and we have 2 more species spotlights to share with you. Taylor Ellis, the wildlife technician with the National Park Service, is going to tell us about how the northern spotted owl is doing. And following that, Bill Merkel, the wildlife biologist with the National Park Service, is going to update us on bats. So if we could welcome Taylor, please.
All right. Hello, everybody. Little feedback. So I'm going to update everyone on the status of our northern spotted owls here on the slopes of Mount Tam, and this is also going to include data from Point Reyes National Seashore, which is where I'm based out of. I've been working with spotted owls for about 20 years now. I've been working with the spotted owl for about 20 years now, and in Point Reyes since 2011, and including the state parks in our area. So that's kind of my background. So we can go to the first slide here. So yeah, why do we study the northern spotted owl? Without getting into tons of background, I bet most of you are aware that the spotted owls have been in trouble now for several decades, largely due to logging, mostly north of Marin County, especially in Oregon and Washington, British Columbia. This is one of 3 subspecies of the spotted owl. There's the northern spotted owl, there's the California spotted owl, which lives in the Sierra Nevada, and then there's also a Mexican spotted owl, which lives in the southwestern US and northern Mexico. They're all similar, but ours is the northern spotted owl, range from British Columbia all the way down here to Marin County, and we are actually at the southern limit of their range, and so it reminds me of talking about the salmon. And they're kind of unusual in that even though they're at the southern end of their range, they're actually the healthiest population of northern spotted owls, contrary to what you see with a lot of other animals. So they have been in steep decline over most of their range, largely historically due to logging. So that's why the federal government listed them as threatened in 1990. So they're protected now. Anybody who wants to do a timber harvest or anything like that in spotted owl habitat has to have spotted owl data to make sure that they're not, taking out a core nest zone or something like that. Of course, in Marin, that's not really a factor because most of the county is protected in one way or another, especially most of our forested areas. So, barring things like forest fire, climate change, like having forest pathogens like beetles and things like that, which are definitely, all those things are happening here. But Marin has the best potential to kind of be a refuge for the northern spotted owl. So we can go to the next one, I think. So some of that I touched on, loss of forested habitat. And I think one of the interesting things, like that, the reason I put that map over there, you can see the dark green in the Point Reyes Peninsula, and then the southern end there around Mount Tam. That's all of our densely forested habitat. It could be, it's mostly Doug fir and then some redwood and also some bishop pine stuff there in Tamalpais State Park. But then you have a big gap in forested habitat until you get to kind of northern Sonoma past Bodega Bay, and then the redwoods kind of pick back up again. And so there's a big, there's northern spotted owls up there too, but ours is sort of a distinct population and have actually been found to be genetically isolated from the other ones. So there's not a lot of back and forth. I mean, I'm sure it happens rarely, but we kind of have our own little deal down here. The most important thing, I think, going on with spotted owls now is that this eastern species of owl called the barred owl, which was first detected in Marin County back in 2002 in Muir Woods, has been expanding its range throughout the West. And basically from like the 1950s until today has come all the way down from Canada, filled up all the forests north of us, including like all those yellow push pins, like all those state parks up in Sonoma. Barred owls are everywhere north of us, and they replace spotted owls in their habitat, live in higher density, outcompete them. And so that range expansion is generally thought to be driven by human habitat alteration, mostly in the Midwest, because it's an eastern species of owl where there's, they're native to the eastern US, there's thousands of them, but now they've basically replaced spotted owls north of us. But slow influx of barred owls from Sonoma to Marin, or from Napa to Marin, because of that big gap in habitat. So we don't get new ones in much. Next one, I think. So how are we doing? Basically, that most of the graph is showing pair occupancy at our sites. And so this is showing that we have 80, 85% of our sites, which are like places where spotted owls have known to live in past years. And we've got about 20 years, actually a little over 20 years of data. Every single year we do this. It's the National Park Service combined with Point Blue. They kind of do the water district stuff, eastern side of the county. National Park Service is doing the state parks and the National Seashore and Golden Gate and Muir Woods and Mount Tam, all that stuff. So anyway, we have continually high occupancy over time, even 2002, which is towards the left end of that graph. No real impact from presence of barred owls because we've never really had more than like 2 or 3 of our owl territories, that have known to have barred owls in them in any given year. And we have something like 112 spotted owl known territories in Marin County, and most of them get, like more than half of them get monitored every single year between the Park Service and Point Blue. Next one. Interestingly, what does change a lot year to year is the reproduction rate. So I go and do like in-person surveys, go and find if the pair is, find if there is a pair in that known site, because they have these big territories. They're very territorial, and if you find two, that's it. Like there's not going to be any other ones until you get to a different canyon. But year to year, up and down, the reproduction bounces around a lot. So some years, like I think 2007, nobody nested for whatever reason. We're not sure why. Just none of the spotted owls nested. They're all out there still, but they just didn't nest. Then other years, you can have a really good nesting year, and it just kind of goes up and down, and that's okay because once a spotted owl becomes an adult, once it makes it through that first year, it's probably going to live for another 10 years at least. A lot of, they have pretty good survivorship. So, they live a long time. They don't have to have a big year every year. So they have the ability to kind of gauge like, well, are there enough wood rats to eat? Should I reproduce this year kind of thing? So yeah, even with all those wild jumps, because they live so long, the population stayed pretty much the same this whole time. Okay. Yeah, all of that. And before we get too far, so the spotted owl is the one on the far right with little spots all over its chest. And if you see him like perched against a redwood trunk with the kind of light filtering down, through the leaves and stuff, you can barely see him. I mean, they look like little splattered light from, just from the forest canopy. And they're pretty dark too, compared to like, say, the Mexican spotted owl, which lives in less densely forested habitat. But then that guy on the bottom is the barred owl, so it's B-A-R-R-E-D, not barn, not to be confused. Okay, I'll wrap it up. But they have the streaks on the chest. So, and I just want to emphasize 20 years of data with Point Blue and the Park Service. Next slide. And this is the last one. Yes, barred owls are that much of a threat. That graph is from Olympic National Park, which is probably the biggest swath of intact virgin forest on the entire Pacific Northwest. They went from over 90% occupancy of spotted owls down to 5 or 10%. It's less than that. That only goes to 2014 because they stopped surveying for them because they're not there. Or if they are there, they won't hoot because the barred owl has already replaced them. In Marin County, we are doing everything we can to not be like this. And this will be I think the last intact population of spotted owls going forward. So yeah, barred owl removal is something that the Fish and Wildlife Service is looking at in terms of protecting an endangered species. That's it.
Hey, thank you. For those of you that don't know, tomorrow's the 50th anniversary of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, so it's pretty exciting for us. And so I was over at a kickoff event over at Fort Mason and got a text that our bat scientist, Gabe Reyes, is sick and could you do the presentation? So I'm up here today. So I'm putting on my chiropterologist hat and I'm gonna do it. Let's see, just to rewind a little bit, I feel like our 2016 Peak Health Report was really a groundbreaking effort. And I know just being with the science team with Alan Fish and Andrea Williams and Sharon Farrell and Janet Klein and others, Lucy Edson, like it was just really inspirational work. And I think we really set a bar high and we set a model for a lot of other groups going forward. One of the things we identified in 2016 was that we had a pretty big data gap with bats. And so we were ready to step in. I think the Water District had some money to purchase some equipment. The Park Service has stepped up with a couple cycles of white nose syndrome funding, which has been really fantastic. And then we've worked with our partner, U.S. Geologic Service and Gabe Reyes, to really get this going. Why are we studying bats? I think they represent, we have 13 species of native bats in Marin County. It represents about 25% of our terrestrial mammalian diversity. So it's a pretty big part of the mammals that are out there on Mount Tam. They do serve important ecological functions. They do prey on a lot of insects, so they do provide that ecosystem service. And as Gabe put together, they're one of our most charismatic shadow fauna. Go next slide. Oh, maybe we could go back real quick. Some of the work we do is actually mist netting and putting radio transmitters on bats, and you can see some of those photos to the right are actually us handling bats. Gabe has a wide array of equipment, and so we do sampling for white nose syndrome. He does sampling for other viruses. We do diet samples, and then some of the bats get transmitters to find roosts. Okay, next slide. So how are the bats doing on Mount Tam? In 2016, we didn't have enough information to assess, and luckily we were able to step into the study. And I believe we're about 5 years in to our work. And so we've indicated the bats for species richness are at good status with moderate confidence. We don't have a trend yet. And then for species presence and distribution, they're also at good status and no trend, moderate confidence. How do we know? We've been doing our acoustic monitoring for at least 5 years. It might even be 6 years. And Katie Smith on our staff is a biologist who helps lead that effort. We put acoustic recorders out with these antennas at 37 sites every year. The acoustic recorders are out for a week, and they collect all the bat calls, which are shown on the upper right. We can then go through with Sonobat software and try to identify those calls, and the analysis piece is taking a lot of time. We're trying to get more of our staff trained up to help Gabe keep up with the data, but that's some exciting work we're doing. And then all this work is part of a broader regional effort called NA-BAT, North American Bat, where we're actually contributing all our data. We're all using similar methods to monitor bats, and it creates this bigger understanding of how bats are doing sort of continent-wide. We also do mist netting in the spring and in the fall or winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, to get breeding season information, and then wintering season, where we're mist netting bats at different sites, and then trying to track them to roost sites and gaining more information about where the bats are roosting. You can go next slide. This is just the 3-year mean of the number of species by our 10-kilometer grids. And what you can see is pretty much we have a pretty stable distribution of points over time. And that's between roughly about 8 and 10 species are detected per each 10-kilometer grid over time. So we're not seeing any trend in that data just yet. Next slide. What are some of the threats to bats? Ongoing drought, megafires and fire suppression, habitat loss and degradation, insect declines, disease effects. The fungus that causes white nose syndrome has been detected in California, but I think they have not detected the virus yet. So it's something that we're continuing to do surveillance on. Can we go next slide? Climate change. Bats are a climate-sensitive species. They have high energetic demands because they are a volant mammal. And they need to eat large amounts of insects every night. They do drink water. They need sources of water, so drought could affect them. And then they're very temperature sensitive at their roost site selection and for raising young. So increased temperatures could create some problems for our bats. There's also some idea that for a large range of wildlife that disease could be increasing with increased temperature too. Next slide. Understanding bat ecology. So here on the left, I think that's actually Katie Smith on our staff, and she She has an antenna, and she's actually tracking one of our radio tag bats. I think in the middle slide is somebody attaching a transmitter to a bat. Some of the exciting work we're doing is we're actually stepping into some work with Modus towers. And these Modus towers they're actually a radio receiver that we're gonna put up on ridge tops. There's a couple that have already gone up at Audubon Canyon Ranch. I think Audubon Bay, Richardson Bay, Audubon just put up one. We got money to purchase 4 different towers that we're gonna put up in Marin County. We're gonna try to get another one down at Pinnacles. I think the state is gonna put up 50 towers statewide. So what's great is for these species that move greater distances, like our hoary bat, we got some money from Point Reyes National Seashore to study hoary bats. And so Gabe was just out tagging hoary bats. One of the bats he caught 10 days later was detected at a Modus tower up in Tacoma, Washington. So it's pretty exciting, just because the effort to track that bat probably wouldn't happen without these remote towers. So that's something we're definitely going to be stepping into. And I think that's it. Thanks to all our partners. This is another great, similar to Spotted Owls, the bats is another great partnership landscape project where we're working with our One Tam partners, we're working with USGS, we're working with our National Park Service network in Pinnacles and Point Reyes, and it's just a great project. So thank you.
Bill, thank you for stepping in and giving such a good presentation. I don't know about you, but between owls and bats, I'm inspired for Halloween after this session. Thanks so much to Taylor and Bill. And now we're going to transition from updates to another part of this work that's as central as the science community. I'd like to invite Suzanne Whelan, ecologist and volunteer coordinator for Marin Water, to guide us into this conversation and to introduce all of our panelists for the next session. Could you please come up to the stage? While they're getting set up during the science soiree, you might also wish to talk to Dr. Bill Merkel further about spotted owls, bats, his coyote work, and he was recently acknowledged by his colleagues for his work with Mission Blue butterflies. So, Bill, you have a lot to share, but thanks for focusing on bats. Thanks.
All right, hi everybody. So nice to see everybody in person, and it's nothing like getting together with your friends to get your endorphins pumping and your smiles sharing. Last week I had the pleasure of going to the California Native Plant Society conference, and when asked in person, and when asked what was my favorite part, I told my boss, the hallway conversations. So it was really those unscripted reunions and the introductions to new colleagues that really bolstered my confidence that what we're doing matters. It was, the science is strong. We've heard from people earlier today, but it's the people that propel it forward. And, One Tam is doing a great job of getting the staff and colleagues to work closer together, but we also provide pathways for new connections. So this event this afternoon is organized to give us all a brief taste of peak health findings so that we all have context and inspiration to have those hallway conversations. Right now, we're going to take a few minutes to have conversations with a few of our diverse community members that make this work possible and to hear how they came to this work. We'll also talk about new relationships that we're building, and possibly talk about future directions that we, all in this room, as One Tam, might be heading. So I'm going to, I think we're going to share that mic, yes? Thank you. We are each going to introduce ourselves by saying our names and how we're related to this One Tam collaborative. And then I'm asking each of you a question. If you could magically transform into one of the plants or animals that we've discussed today that we're studying, what would it be and why? I'll start out as an example. So I'm Suzanne Whelan, and I'm the volunteer coordinator and ecologist at Marin Water. And if I could transform into anything today, I think it would be a bumblebee. Thank you, Sarah. I just find them, they're just cute. I really like their outfits. They're really social. I am not a solitary bee. I like their work ethic. Obviously, they are really, bound with vegetation and plants, and I'm an avid gardener. And that they have extra eyes on the top of their head. I'm a mom. I really think that would come in handy. So that's what I would transform into. Thank you.
I'm feeling what you're saying about the extra eyes lately. Hi, I'm Lisette Arellano. I work for the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy as the community science program, as one of the community science program managers for One Tam. And if I could be anything, I would think I would be a California giant salamander for a couple of reasons. A, they're beautiful, and who doesn't want to be beautiful? B, they can be neotenic, which is really cool, I think. And who doesn't want to spend a bunch of time in Bootjack Creek? That sounds lovely. And thirdly, or fourthly, whatever, I really want to know where they go when they move overland. So that is something I have a lot of curiosity about. And so I want to be a salamander when I grow up. What do you want to be when you grow up, Andy? Animal-wise.
So my name is Andy. I was a Link participant in the summer of 2022, and I'd rather be like moss, because I just think they have like such a fun texture onto like plants and trees, and also like you can't get rid of it, so you can't get rid of me, So.
Hi, my name's Quoth. I use he, him pronouns. I've done quite a few things. I was a real intern the school year 2020 to 2021. I was then the real senior intern 2021 to 2022, where I also helped with the Canal after-school program. And then alongside Andy, I was a Link program participant this summer, 2022. And I was also thinking, Newt, not for any like science-y reasons, but I just really like the idea of my life being like vibing under a log or a rock. It sounds cozy, it sounds cool, except for like when a little toddler comes up and looks at you.
I'm Frederick, and I was volunteering with each of the partner agencies before One Tam existed, and so I was very happy to continue and to keep volunteering with One Tam. In terms of an animal or plant, I'm not exactly sure what I would want to be, and with apologies to Suzanne, I know I do not want to be a bee, because then Sarah would pin me to a collection somewhere.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked about peak health as a collaborative science effort among One Tam staff, but we're here to talk about the community participation that is vital to the work we do. Some of our work, frankly, just wouldn't happen if we didn't have participation from volunteers and extended partners. As a volunteer coordinator, one of the most exciting things to come out of the first peak health report for me was the known unknowns. What is it out there that we need to learn more about? What in the environment maybe have we been overlooking and we need to spend more time on? I love getting the updates from the scientists to see what they're thinking about, because my goal is to bring together the goal of serving the community and also providing the natural resource protection goal of Marin Water and One Tam. When considering new projects for volunteers, I like to consider how many wins we could build up at the same time. So I think, what do the scientists need out of this? What are there community members out there that can do things that the scientists can't do? What community members out there might have the right skill set to move this forward? And maybe there's community members out there that would get the most lift from engaging in this project. My mentor, Janet Klein, she has always been a whiz at getting the biggest bang for the buck and really capitalizing on that win-win and lifting as many people at the same time and also investing in the resource, and that's what I aim to do as a volunteer coordinator. So as a result, our programs are both about nature and people. And so here we are, we're gonna talk a little bit about the people side. And Lisette, I have a question for you first. With your work, who has contributed to the growing body of knowledge of peak health?
I think put very broadly, earthlings, people that love life on planet Earth, that love planet Earth in this particular little place, area that we live in. And, you know, all kinds of people that have a curiosity, and that's been a lot of longtime volunteers. You know, young folks like link participants and students. I have a eternally soft spot in my heart for high school students that want to talk about amphibians or insects or whatever it is, because there's so much in our society that is not focused on life, on living, and it's just so rich to find these spaces of to express that particular love. And of course, you know, the staff, the people that have made this their careers and that do this Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then some more. And so with that, you know, everybody in this room, I think, has been a contributor in some way. And I do want to give a shout out too to all the internet strangers that don't know that they're contributing to Peak Health through iNaturalist, but I see you. And, you know, if you're an internet stranger that's here today, and I'm 10 Salamanders on iNaturalist, do come say hi. I really like meeting internet strangers from iNaturalist. So yes, I want to be very clear about that.
Okay. So we've touched upon a few ways, but I know there are many other ways that people come together to engage in this work. So this question is for Andy. And what inspired you to get involved in One Tam's youth programs?
So I got into the One Tam program through my friend who has similar interests as me and recommended Link as they had participated in it in the past. And for me, I haven't been presented with many opportunities to interact with nature in an educational way. So I decided to take this chance in order to learn about the stuff that I'm passionate about while getting some experience in the area. And I've always had like some love for nature, even as like a child. So like this has always been fun.
Nice. And you did Link this past year. Excellent. And Kavoth, how have you interacted with some of the themes that we might have touched on today?
Thanks. One major theme that I've interacted with is community science. So my first real experience that really connected with me was my first year with Real. Sarah gave us a really great lesson on iNaturalist, which has been talked about a bit, a community science tool. And it really taught me an everyday person, a high schooler, a young kiddo, can be a scientist and contribute to research and all this cool stuff. And then later, my next year with Real, I gave a similar, not as great of a lesson, but a similar lesson to that cohort of kids about iNaturalists, and saw them having those interactions of like, oh my gosh, I'm a scientist. And then I've also brought that back to my own community, so like using it when I'm going on hikes around my neighborhood, or yeah, that area. My mom as well, I've like shown her how to use it, and now she uses it on hikes, and it's just like really cool to see everyone interacting with that. And then also, Andy touched upon this a bit, but like the community outreach to marginalized groups or people with lower access, that's greatly affected me. I wouldn't be the person I am today without a lot of these programs. Yeah.
Thank you. And Frederick, you are an avid volunteer. How do you decide which programs to donate your time to, and how might this connect you better to place?
In a way, I'm selfish. I look for programs where I'm going to learn something. So before getting involved with the Marin Water District, I knew nothing about botany. I think I could spell it, and that was about it. After 5 field seasons, helping establish a baseline of all the plant taxa on Mount Tam, I ended up, for example, being at that conference last weekend with the CNPS, running into Suzanne and having a hallway conversation. I knew nothing about foothill yellow-legged frogs, why they were endangered, where they lived, western pond turtles, fungi, thanks to Lizette. Thanks to Carl, I know how to construct a trail in such a way that it will not then erode down the side of the mountain. So things like that. Somewhere where I have an opportunity to learn and perhaps even to share information later.
Thank you. There's a well-shared proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. When I first heard that, I said, oh, that is the basis for all my work. So it's just so important for One Tam to work this way, and we want to reflect on that and why we, make the circle bigger and bigger and invite everybody in. So, Lisette, again, how would you define community science, and why do you think it's central to One Tam's way of working?
So community science, just very dryly defined, is the practice of bringing people from different realms, so professional scientists, man on the street to do science together. But more philosophically, I think it revolves around 2 simple truths that were bestowed upon me from mentors and colleagues. One is that people do science. And the second is that data is not the destination. And so what do I mean by people do science, right? So science is an expression of human creativity, like art, like music. And the scientific method is very powerful, and it is something that everybody can learn to engage in a rigorous way, whether they're professional or not. And I think we all gain, as Frederick was saying, selfishly something from learning to think critically in that way. And secondly, the part about data is not the destination. Data is important, as our previous speakers have shown. We're able to gain insight into what's going on in the mountain with that data. But data in itself is not it all. There's a practice of science that is about regulatory mandates. There's a type of science that is about peer-reviewed literature. But I want us to make room for an enterprise of science that unites the heart and the mind. And I think that's what community science is. It brings us together as people, as sentient beings in this planet. It brings us together as a community that can take action around things that are challenging, like climate change. And it brings us together in appreciation of each other and of the place that we inhabit. And so with that, I think community science is such a powerful practice, and I'm so glad that it's something that is foundational to the One Tam way of working.
Thank you. Kavoth, I have a question for you. How do you plan on incorporating some of the skills that you've learned through working with Reel and Link? Or maybe you can tell us how you're already using some of those.
I have learned so many skills. For real, I have already incorporated most, if not all of them, mostly professional skills. I think it's really important for us, like youth, to learn how to exist in professional spaces, and through these programs I really have, like financial literacy, also like talking about wages, which is an uncomfortable subject, but a necessary subject. Adri specifically has like really taught me the importance of that. I learned resume building skills for all different kinds of contexts, like how to also handle the USA Jobs website, which is insane. I've learned interviewing skills, which I've used again and again, both being the interviewee and the interviewer. And it's really nice to like reflect on all these skills that I've learned and like who I was like even last year versus who I am now, and like how I've learned all these things of like professionalism, how to have interpersonal relationships, and how to interact with nature.
Thank you. And Andy, how has your experience with One Tam shaped your decisions or, influenced your life both professionally and personally, if you want to share?
Might not do personally, but during my time in Link, I met a lot of people who have worked in Lagoon Park Nursery and the Marin Headlands Nursery. I've also met people who were in the middle of restoration projects, and that kind of inspired me to follow in their footsteps, because I've always wanted to sort of work in some environmental field that deals with restorations of habitats. And through Link, I was able to gain some experiences and knowledge on the work and labor that they do while building connections and finding even more opportunities. Even though Link is over for me.
Womp womp.
Alum is a powerful word. Frederick, how has being a community scientist influenced your life?
I would say that putting things into iNaturalist, sometimes having somebody identify something before I'd finished putting the observation in. Although, if anybody here is a specialist on diatoms, I put in a diatom about 4 years ago. Nobody's bitten yet. So I think collaboration is a key thing. And to find out that there are a lot of like-minded people out there, both with an interest in Mount Tam and broader in Marin, and ever-expanding circles, is basically as far as you want to go. So it's been a way of building connections.
Thank you. So as you heard, One Tam is made up of our 5 partners, but we also work with so many other individuals, communities, volunteers, and partners. Most importantly, we work with as many people as we can who enjoy and depend on Mount Tam. With One Tam, we've created a different way to support these partners and ultimately the mountain. So we want to look ahead a little bit and see what the directions might be for growing these community connections. Kavoth, can I ask you, how has your community expanded through your experiences with One Tam?
My community has expanded in a lot of ways. I think like starting off just physically, I live out in West Marin, which is kind of isolated, and these programs have really helped me get out of that area and into different national and state parks and different communities that I otherwise would not have interacted with. I've also gone to do a lot of really cool networking with some awesome, knowledgeable people, building me like really cool pathways and opening a lot of doors. I've personally grown within my community as a leader, at least I'd like to think, among my peers, among my family and friends. I think just overall, there's just been a lot of growth, positive growth.
Thank you. Lisette, you mentioned, everybody has mentioned iNaturalist at this point, but what do you think the potential of crowdsourced community science is for our future endeavors?
I think it's twofold. So kind of getting back at that idea of data is not the destination. So from a data perspective, we are out on the mountain a lot, but there's a lot of roads out there. It's a big little area. And we can't be out there all the time, but I hope y'all are outside some of the time. And I think, a lot of people visit Mount Tam. And when we're able to contribute natural history observations through that platform, that's a very powerful thing because, my cool story about this one time I saw a snake, when it becomes a lot of people's cool story about how this other time they saw a snake, in aggregate begins to tell us things about the distribution and temporal patterns of different animals, plants, fungi, and diatoms. And so, from a data perspective, we are starting to do some more in-depth data explorations about what iNaturalist data can tell us about the floristics of Mount Tam. So, watch this space, as well as learn more about taxa that are difficult to see just because they are elusive. And we don't necessarily have a remote sensing framework to look for them. And then from, data is not the destination, again, from the not the destination, community, iNaturalist allows people to connect with each other, both in person and online. And so I think iNaturalist is very futuristic in that it transcends space and time. And I'm just so excited about that.
And speaking about remote sensing, do I dare bring up the Marin Mammal Watch? Can we talk about that?
We can talk about Marin Wildlife Watch. Yes. Technology plays such a key part to community science. Again, it's hard to aggregate observations if everybody is keeping them in their nature journal, which again, nature journal, totally great. But, you end up having a big pile of them, and that's really hard to aggregate. And digital platforms, again, allow us to collect a lot of data. And with that comes a lot of new issues. So Marin Wildlife Watch, formerly known as Marin Wildlife Picture Index Project, is one of the marquee One Tam programs, which you may be wondering, it's like, whatever happened to that? And the answer is there's been a lot of behind the scenes work. It's been a tremendous learning experience for us as staff and as a community of volunteers, but that's involved a lot of people that are not in this room, but are with us in spirit at Wildlife Conservation International, at Wildlife Insights, which is the platform that we're using now. A lot of researchers doing really cool work with computer vision and artificial intelligence. And there's, I want to give a shout out to Lizzie Edson and to Sarah Leon Guerrero for all of their amazing work with the data management, and to so many people in this room that have been part of that project. But basically, when you're working with a lot of data and with brand new technology, you're running into new issues. And then, even no matter how technologically advanced we get, and I may come to eat my words in 50 years, who knows, we can never forget about people, right? And so there's still a very strong people element to this project, to Marin Wildlife Watch, which is like, even though the computers can ID bobcats, they can't always do it super well. And our brains, our eyes, our time, our love for these animals is still something that the mountain needs, that we need to learn about them. And so to anyone that's, ever like switched phones and how hard it is to like adopt this new technology, and you're like, what did I do to myself? Now let's multiply that by like 10 million data points and hundreds of new volunteers. And that is what my team is currently working on addressing, is that technology rollout. We want to do it in a way that is that is hopefully a little bit easier than when you get a brand new phone. So yes, thank you for talking about Marin Wildlife Watch.
I can't wait. Speaking of technology and people, this is for any of you. So do any of you have anything to say about that intersection of like the fast-paced advances of technology and how that has maybe given you more of an insight into science, but then also more of an insight into community building? I know this is off the cuff. Anyone? No? No?
You know, I'll just say again, just reiterate the fact that I think, you know, as a lot of people come into science out of a place of love, right? It's like you go outside. You know, I have a 3-month-old daughter at home, and her favorite thing is, you know, she's only 3 months old, but she likes to be outside, and I can see that fascination in her tiny little eyes. You know, looking at the trees, appreciating them. Now that she's past the sleepy, angry potato face. And, right? And so, you know, that to me just speaks so powerfully of that innate human desire to be close to nature, to appreciate nature, to have curiosity. You know, I can only imagine what questions her little brain is formulating. You know, and I'm sure she'll get to the why stage, and then I'll find out, and I'll be like, oh, I wish I had found out. But anyway, not there yet. Still wondering. Still cute. And so, yeah, you know, we come into that and we ask ourselves, you know, it's like, what is this? What does it do? But in academic ecology and the practice of ecology and land management, there isn't a lot of room for that curiosity because we always have somewhere to be. And you know, I think of it a lot as iNaturalist in some ways. Has brought into, and other platforms like eBird have brought into the 21st century that given us an excuse to engage in that innate age-old practice, right? Like, I think inside all of us, there's a small child that wants to be like, I just saw this cool thing, wants to hold it up and show other people. But we don't really live in a world, you know, that welcomes that. It has shut it down out of us, you know, like you know, we live in in the words of many mobility activists, we live in, you know, car slum. And so, full of highways and whatnot. And so we, you know, we want to connect to nature and to each other. And I think it's great that these tools provide an excuse to do so, you know, whatever it takes to get us through that day. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for Andy. So Andy, in 5 or 10 years, maybe you will be a volunteer coordinator. Maybe you'll be out teaching Lisette's daughter. What might you do to, you know, advance the work of One Tam?
So I feel like I haven't spent too much time and don't know too much about One Tam in order to know what like needs improvement. But personally for me, maybe increase wages also, because we need money, especially with this economy. But possibly try to spread the word a little bit more, because I was only able to hear about One Tam through my friends, so I consider myself very lucky about that. And maybe try and find some way to cross the language barriers, because there's a lot of people here who are maybe not like very efficient in reading or speaking English, so there's a lot of trouble that they deal with. I have like some personal experiences, but I won't get too deep into that. And yeah.
Well, I'm sure my daughter will appreciate you as a caring and looking out for her supervisor. So, future is bright.
Thank you. Yeah, we do so many things at Mount Tam with the studies and community science and stewardship, and I think we do a pretty good job of outreach as well. But obviously, we can do a lot more. And thing about One Tam being, you know, the agencies, and then the partners is like the next ripple. And then the volunteers are the next ripple, and then if you go out, it's everybody that depends on the mountain and enjoys the mountain. So, but like Lisette, like those strangers are they might not even know that they're part of One Tam, right? So we, you know, need to get out there and sell the Kool-Aid and let everybody know what's going on, and that we need them. And I love working with students, and thinking about the future and when I'm looking to, how do I expand the folks that I'm working with. I really like to think about working with students who aren't necessarily already tree huggers. I'm a self-proclaimed tree hugger, right? So instead of just going to the AP environmental science class, like going to the journalism class, going to the poli-sci class, going to the, and because we need everyone in together to understand, this landscape and how our health depends on the health of the mountain. And we're not gonna do that just with scientists alone or just with folks that volunteer. So expanding that. Okay, so I would like to continue this conversation, but soon we will all go outside and have conversations in the beer garden, I swear. I want to thank everybody up here for sharing their thoughts. There's a couple other folks I want to thank while I have the mic. So you might have noticed these amazing artworks that are on display behind us, and then we have a few of the originals around the venue. So these are artworks from a local organization called the Northern California Society for Botanical Artists, and they have been working for the past, I think, 4 years to build up a florilegium. So a florilegium is a collection of botanical art, so accurate and gorgeous, just pictures, paintings, drawings of the different plants on Mount Tam. So they've been generous enough to let us show, this is just some of their works. They just finished a exhibit at the Marin Garden Center, and there's a few of the artists here today. So when we're out in the beer garden, hopefully some of them say, please ask me about the florilegium, and they can talk to you about that. Another person that I wanted to bring up is Doreen Smith. And if any of you know Doreen, she is just an amazing botanist, has done so much for this county over the past few decades, was really instrumental with the vegetation map right at the get-go. And her legacy just keeps living on. And she's not here in the room tonight, but hopefully maybe, this is being live streamed, so maybe she's out there. And we just wanted to give a special shout out to her and recognize her work. And as a small token of recognition, we have picked out one of the florilegium pieces to gift to her. So at one of the future field trips, we'll get her out and we'll give that to her. So just wanted to acknowledge Doreen Smith. So let's see. In closing, I want to emphasize something that I think we can all agree on, that this connection is a two-way street. We're not working in silos. I'm sorry, but we're all social bees here. So we work with a broad range of community members, but we know it is not the full extent of people that depend and love Mount Tam. So where do we want to build new relationships? Are we open enough to hear people when they say, hey, I have an idea, can you come and help us? We want to acknowledge that when we say community, this does not yet include everyone. We're not blind to this. So we still have work to do. The work that we're doing is special and it's impactful, but we can always do better. And I feel like with this group, we'll continue to reach for that. So thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. I loved hearing about your experiences, the ways you've been involved, and seeing the threads of science and community weaving together so beautifully. I hope that others are inspired to get involved too. Thank you. Before we all go outside for the science soiree, let's pause a moment and think about what we might carry forward as food for thought from this conversation. From this gathering, we've finally been able to share in person today. To help us do that, I'm going to offer a few words and then also invite my colleague, Alan Fish, to come up and share a bit of his thoughts from today as well. For me, one theme came up in my thoughts to share with you, and that is braiding sweetgrass. I've been thinking about how to recenter and replace myself in the world. I think about it when I share Ka'ashi Trail at Muir Beach, Salmon in Miwok, offered by Figure as a name for that trail when we restored Big Lagoon. I've thought a lot about it thanks to the land back movement. I work for a public agency on public land, but we're asked to think differently about what that means with the land back movement. Of course, for the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, a constant inspiration to think differently about our public lands and our public trust. But on the theme of braiding sweetgrass, One Tam style, I'm inviting you to take a look at our working hands and how they ground us in a braiding sweetgrass theme of mind, body, and spirit. And we take the manzanita, the ceanothus, and the redwood to braid together to take in the full connectivity of all, the mutual benefits of us and our stewardship spirit to the earth, to Tam, as well as giving thanks as we braid these gifts of abundance from nature and we offer back. Our mind, one of the strands of the sweetgrass, is full of new information, eager for more. And I ask you to hold Rachel Carson up as one who built on the work of community scientists to write compellingly of a tragedy in our midst. 60 years ago, we read Silent Spring, and and our nation acted, banning DDT. We have peregrines, spotted owls, pelicans. And then she turned at the end of her life to what she thought was her most important contribution, revitalizing her earlier article, The Sense of Wonder, the premise of which is for each of us to take a child and share the wonder of our world. She also got to work on pondering the mysteries of monarch butterflies and fulfilling a dream to see redwoods. This body of the three strands, the body, is a call in response to a groundswell of action 50 years ago. Tomorrow, GGNRA is 50. Mid-Penn also, and our marine sanctuaries celebrate 50 years this year too. Anniversaries are a time to pause, celebrate, when we all work for an earth body to be healthy, be available to nurture us, to continue the cycles together of renewal and hope. Rachel Carson offered it also in a different way. She offered as renewal and hope that spring comes after winter, that the bud comes after the leaf, and that the day comes after the dark. We need these kinds of hope, of renewal and cycles that we celebrate. Okay, the final strand is our spirit. And we are asking all of us here, especially when you get the Peak Health Report, to thank Peter Nelson and Figure, the Federated Indians of Grayton Rancheria. May we respect and listen to some statements in the purpose that Danny shared with me, that paper they contribute provides a framework and strategy for us to reintegrate, reconnect, and reframe, and learn from the peoples of this land, their practices, their ancient wisdom, and to do all of this in the spirit of land stewardship here on Tam, which is Coast Miwok land. Thank you for that guiding spirit. Well, as we pair Peak Health 1.0 with 2.0 at this launch today, we have much to look forward to in webinars and field seminars. We have much to look forward to as we all brush off our INAT, can't wait. And please pause now to reflect on our amazing speakers, our panel, as we welcome with our heart our next speaker, Alan Fish, who really needs no introduction, but for me, I have grown into my own role as an elder, part of the old growth of One Tam, and I'm doing this with Alan out of respect. He's our director of the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory and a legend in the world both of science and community science. So Alan, thank you for sharing a few words with us.
If you ever get asked to give a talk, make sure that you're not after Mia Monroe. No, it's a total honor. Mia and I have a long legacy, and it's. I was in high school in East Palo Alto many years ago, 1975, 76, and Mia's mother, Elvira Monroe, was my English teacher, and she used to brag about her daughter working in the new Golden Gate National Recreation Area. That was a long time. And a long circle back. I have just one theme that I'd like to bring to the group, and I'm really humbled to be in front of you. This is a really magnificent group of human animals that I get to share this space with, and I know that on a very deep level we love the natural world in a really broad way. But I don't have any data for my Peak Health presentation, but I'm worried about the number of naturalists and biologists that aren't coming into our professional world, and the diversity of people that need to be part of this story and this conversation and need to be coming up through our ranks. And I have no data, but I have two points in my recovery plan. And I'm especially got concerned during the COVID era and realizing that a big gap in our response to COVID in 2020 and 2021, 22 was that we're virus stupid. We're pretty naive about viruses. We don't learn about viruses and diseases in grade school and junior high school and high school, and we know a lot. The scientists know a lot, but we don't bring it forward into a world so that it's part of common knowledge, and yet it benefits us enormously to do so. I got another little glimpse of information when my daughter, who's 20, Margot, and is at UC Santa Cruz studying environmental biology. Another shout out to the UC Santa Cruz folks. And called me up last year and said, Dad, do you ever use calculus? How many of you just your spines just went freeze? Oh my gosh, do I admit it? Do I not? It took me a good 30 seconds, then I said, no, actually I don't. There are math people and statisticians that do a much better job, and I don't really remember too much, and she's struggling with these prerequisites and things. She's a passionate biologist to be, and yet that's a real barrier. That's a barrier right there. And of course we've got many barriers. There's calculus and physics and statistics, and there's also English, right? There's English, there's access, there's summer jobs, there's internships, and having enough money, and having a car, and so a lot of things for us to think about as far as barriers. So my 2-point plan. First of all, I realize that one of the problems that I have, and I'm working on getting better, is as a biologist, I don't often talk about how damn fun it is. And I loved it when Eric Ettlinger said he loves snorkeling in the stream. Eric, yay, that was great. And a lot of passion came out in the room today, a lot of passion for the work we do. It's greedy. It's actually greedy because it's really fun. It's damn fun. And we're getting paid sometimes to do this work. And we even go outside when we're not being paid. Imagine that. So show your passion for being a biologist. I think that's a really big part of the story. We're having more fun than anybody else. So let's show that. Remember to role model being a passionate, not just biologist, but a passionate student. Remember your humility. Remember your studentship. We all know there's a better story behind the story that we're telling. There's a better story that's deeper and more interesting and more complicated, but more exciting and profound than the one that we learned as undergraduates or graduate students or read in the literature somewhere. There's a better story out there, and it's our job to find it. So bring your passion forward, harvest the stories, harvest new stories, send them upwards to our bosses, send them upwards to our supervisors, send them out into the world. We're the people that are going to find the new stories because we're hanging out in the streams, in the serpentine barrens. We're hanging out with the bees. We're learning the new material, and this is the material that needs to be out in the world to refresh it. A friend of mine says, don't forget to be big. Be big in the world. Our job is to be big. I know being a solitary bee is important. I used to be that guy too. But it's important for you all as biologists, naturalists, to be big in the world and let the rest of the world know how important this work is. Point 2, empower others. Make it a litmus test for yourself when you decide this is what I'm going to do today. See if it empowers people around you, especially these younger biologists, these younger naturalists, the students that are coming up, the people that are around you, the community volunteers that you work with. Empower others. Give them time. Give them your ear. Promote them, and both verbally and philosophically, but also with real stuff like money. Promote them with money. We need to increase pay. I'm really glad, Andy, that you brought that into the conversation. That's a real big thing in the Bay Area. We need to provide pay for the work that's real work that we really do. And it shouldn't be offset that we're having fun. That's sort of the wink, that we're having fun, but you shouldn't have to get paid less for it. And again, encourage people to be big and broad and confident in their work. Your work and your place is to be big and broad in the world and share the stories out. People love nature. We all come to the world with an inherent love of the natural world. And some people get squished because they don't want to take calculus, or someone told them that there's a hoop or a barrier or something that's going to make it difficult. And then they decide, okay, I guess I'm not a biologist. Okay, I guess I'm not a naturalist. What a tragedy. What a loss for our community. What a loss for the planet, that is. I'm going to close up now, but how do we open the door on being a naturalist biologist to as wide a community as possible? What if, and I've been thinking about this because I'm a bird guy, what if there was no ceiling on being a naturalist? What if there was no apparent economic or glass ceiling of any kind? Would we look different? Yeah, we would. And how exciting would that? How exciting would that be? How exciting would that change be to see our community be different and newer and refreshed in the world and be ready to take on the challenges of the 21st century in a real way? So maybe we'll change. I'm honored to be with you guys today and to basically suggest that change is not only possible, but incredibly great and a wonderful way to take ourselves into a new place. This is a really amazing community, and that we are a cross-agency community that communicates with the community volunteers, that's bonded by a love of place, a specific place, and perhaps it's one of the oldest and best things that human animals do, is to cross over between agencies, between tribes, between types of people, and love the place that we live in and study it and talk about it and share stories. So that's my message, and I'm really honored to be with you guys today. Thank you, everybody. I'm not going to relinquish just yet, although Mia's going to nudge me here. But I've been witnessing for the last year the incredible amount of work and hours of work that particularly 3 people have done to make this possible. And I'm sorry if I'm preempting any other presentations, but I'd like to invite Yolanda Millette, Michaela Gentile, and Mel Hackett up to the stage to be honored for their work. Please come up. I have the privilege of working in and among these 3 powerhouse people, and I have heard the hours of Zoom meetings go on, and the amount of deliberation to make this event for you seem like it was done easily and casually and with no big deal. And here we are at a beer garden. It's so relaxed. But I got to tell you, it was a lot of work, and you have these 3 to congratulate. So please, another round of applause. I do want to mention that there are at least a dozen other people who contributed immensely to this. Suzanne Whelan, incredible amount of work. Suzanne, bravo, and great forum. Thank you so much. When Suzanne was talking, I was thinking, oh my God, we need a One Tam podcast. And you need to be the person. It needs to be you. So I would listen to you every day driving to work. Anyway, and then a broad community of people from all of the agencies that contributed to all of these meetings in order to get this together. And I'm happy to relinquish the mic and let any of you also offer acknowledgement.
Thank you, Alan. This was quite unexpected and totally appreciate it. Yes, thank you to everyone that helped this come together, our planning committee, in which we had like weekly meetings, then became monthly, then quarterly, and then it was just us. But Carl, you came to a number of the meetings, you helped plan, Suzanne, Mia, and I know I'm forgetting something, forgetting someone, Bill, oh my gosh, Bill Merkel, yes, all of your comments, we totally appreciate all of that, and Danny and Rob and Rachel and Sarah and Lisette and all of our little side conversations. Yeah, it was, thank you, and I appreciate this being my first summit and able to attend it and see all these wonderful faces. So I think it's time to go to the beer garden, right? And I'll turn it back over to Mia for that part.
Well, Alan reminded me that we did check the registration and no one checked participating in that primate eating deprivation study. So I think we should just heed Yolanda's invitation to go to the beer garden. And I'm just going to go over, let's see, we want to remind you that the people who've spoken and participated are going to be at the soiree. So please come up to us and ask questions about our presentations or things that are on your mind or share whatever. So we've tried to make sure we annotate ourselves in our name tags. And let's see, we have the space till 6, so enjoy the party. And one last reminder, oh, this is such an important reminder. Please remember that the One Tam Summit is not over. Keep your eyes on the One Tam website because there's going to be webinars, field trips, other information sharing. There's going to be a lot more. This is just a kickoff that we're so fortunate to finally be able to have. So thank you for joining. And Alan, I just really love how you ended this in so many ways, but to thank the people who brought us together here. Thank you.